The stars in the vast expanse of space were a cold, distant beauty, twinkling like diamonds strewn across the velvet black canvas of the universe. Yet for those aboard the Starship Ascendant, there was no time for stargazing. Instead, the ship was moving at full throttle through the galaxy, its crew working tirelessly to stay one step ahead of an ancient enemy who had a much more intimate understanding of the cosmos. But amid all the chaos and the high-stakes missions, there was something far stranger than anything they'd ever encountered yet. First Lieutenant Joshua "Josh" Carter had been assigned to an elite team tasked with negotiating a peace treaty with the Ornari, a species of advanced, semi-humanoid aliens. Their reputation for diplomacy was unrivaled, but they were also fiercely protective of their homeworlds and fiercely proud of their history. As a member of the Federation of United Planets, Josh was well prepared for the delicate dance of intergalactic politics. Or so he thought. The mission had taken an unexpected turn when they arrived at the Ornari's capital, a sprawling metropolis, gleaming like an oasis against the deep green landscape. Josh, a seasoned military officer, expected no less than the usual formalities. But what he didn't anticipate was the strange series of events that followed. The peaceful meeting had quickly devolved into confusion, with their representative, a diplomat named Sirka, becoming oddly distant. Her speech became erratic, her movements jerky as though she were fighting an invisible force. "What the hell's going on here?" Josh muttered, his hand tightening around the edge of his communicator. The rest of his team, including his trusty co-pilot, Lieutenant Karis Riker, exchanged looks of confusion. Karis, a no-nonsense pilot with a penchant for humor in the face of danger, raised an eyebrow. "You sure you didn't get us into some kind of cultural minefield, Josh?" she teased, but there was an edge to her voice. She was as confused as he was. Josh didn't respond. His mind raced as he considered the implications. The Ornari were supposed to be one of the most peaceful species in the galaxy. What had happened? Why was their ambassador acting this way? Before he could even process it, Sirka's body contorted, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. A sharp scream split the air, echoing through the grand hall. Suddenly, she collapsed to the floor in a heap, her breath shallow and irregular. A sudden shift in the air pressure warned Josh before the floor beneath him began to rumble violently. He quickly glanced up at the ceiling. The massive crystal chandeliers swayed dangerously, and the walls trembled as though they were alive. "Everyone get down!" Josh shouted, diving toward Karis and pulling her to the ground. The rest of the team followed suit, bracing themselves for whatever was about to come next. The floor split open with a deafening crash. In the center of the room, a pulsating rift of swirling light began to form, and from it emerged something truly monstrous. A massive creature, half humanoid, half insectoid, stepped out of the rift. Its exoskeleton shimmered with a dark sheen, and its eyes glowed with a cold malice. The air around it rippled with an energy that Josh couldn't even begin to comprehend. It had the build of a warrior, tall and imposing, with jagged claws and a mouth that twisted in a grotesque snarl. "Impossible," Karis muttered, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of the creature's otherworldly growls. "This can't be real." "Stay focused," Josh said, already scrambling to his feet. He pulled out his blaster and aimed it at the creature. But before he could fire, the creature extended a tendril-like arm, knocking the weapon out of his hand with a single swipe. The air around them thickened with an oppressive pressure as the creature advanced. Sirka, still on the floor, groaned softly. Her once peaceful face was twisted in agony, and she appeared to be struggling against some unseen force, as if the creature was somehow controlling her. "What the hell is going on?" Karis demanded, pulling out her own weapon. But the creature didn't seem interested in immediate violence. It was too busy causing chaos, sending shockwaves of energy through the hall with every step it took. The ground cracked under its weight, and the walls around them began to crumble. "We need to get out of here." "Now," Josh ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. But as he turned to lead the group toward the nearest exit, he saw something that froze him in his tracks. A figure appeared in the doorway, stepping through the smoke and debris that filled the room. At first, Josh thought it was another alien from the Ornari, but as the figure stepped into the light, he saw something far more extraordinary. It was a girl, an alien girl, her skin glowing with an ethereal luminescence. Her eyes, a brilliant shade of violet, seemed to shimmer like stars in the sky. Her hair was long and silver, flowing behind her like a silken veil. She was wearing a flowing robe that shimmered with a soft, almost magical glow. Despite her otherworldly appearance, there was something remarkably human about her, an unspoken connection that made Josh's heart race. But it wasn't her beauty that caught his attention. It was the expression on her face. She looked stunned. Her mouth hung slightly open as she gazed at the creature that was wreaking havoc in the room. The monster seemed to notice her too, its glowing eyes locking onto her with malevolent interest. Josh couldn't tell what was happening, but he had a feeling that this alien girl wasn't just some innocent bystander. There was something about her that made the creature hesitate, its massive frame freezing in mid-motion. "Who is she?" Karis whispered, her voice full of wonder. Josh shook his head, his mind spinning with questions. "I don't know." In that moment, the creature seemed to release a low, growling sound, its body vibrating with increasing intensity. The girl slowly took a step forward, still staring at the creature in utter disbelief, but there was a spark of something within her, a flicker of something dangerous, something powerful. Then, without warning, she raised her hand toward the beast, and the room seemed to fall into a deep silence. The air shifted. The walls stopped trembling. And for the first time, the creature's eyes blinked. It was stunned. The silence was deafening, but only for a moment. The creature's stunned pause was fleeting, and within seconds, its growl intensified, the low rumble reverberating through the crumbling walls of the grand hall. It was clear now, this wasn't a simple attack. It wasn't just another hostile force intent on destruction. It was something far more sinister, a force of pure malice and rage. And the girl, the alien girl, who had inexplicably appeared out of nowhere, seemed to be the only thing standing between them and total annihilation. Josh's heart pounded in his chest as he quickly assessed the situation. His blaster was still lying useless on the floor, just out of reach. Karis was crouched beside him, her weapon still drawn but pointed at the floor in confusion. The rest of the team huddled close, unsure of how to react. They'd never encountered anything like this before. The alien girl, her violet eyes wide and focused, took another step forward. The creature snarled, its tendrils curling as if preparing to strike. But she didn't flinch. She remained rooted to the spot, her hand still raised. Who is she?" Karis whispered, her voice tinged with disbelief. Josh didn't have an answer, though he couldn't shake the strange feeling that she was more than just a bystander. Her aura, the energy around her, was different. It felt familiar, like something he had encountered before, though he couldn't place it. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as he studied her, noting the way her body seemed to shimmer with a kind of ethereal light. The creature, sensing that something was wrong, let out a piercing shriek, sending shockwaves through the room. It lunged forward, its claws swiping through the air, but just as it seemed to strike, the girl's hand flicked downward. A blast of radiant energy erupted from her palm, striking the creature square in the chest. The force of the blow sent it reeling backward, crashing into the wall with a deafening thud. The entire building shook as if the foundations themselves had been rattled by the force of the strike. "Holy hell," Karis muttered under her breath, her wide eyes fixed on the girl. Did she just? But Josh didn't have time to dwell on that. The creature, enraged but undeterred, was recovering quickly. It pushed itself off the ground with terrifying speed, its eyes burning with renewed fury. The girl, however, seemed unfazed. She moved with the grace of someone who was not just prepared for battle, but perhaps even anticipating it. "Get back!" Josh shouted, his voice sharp as he pushed Karis aside. But she didn't need to be told. The entire team had already begun to retreat, instinctively putting distance between themselves and the escalating chaos. The girl, still standing her ground, raised her hand again, this time with both palms facing the creature. A pulse of violet energy erupted from her body, flooding the room with light so bright it almost felt like daylight. The creature screeched in pain, recoiling as the energy burned through its exoskeleton. It was clear that the creature wasn't just an opponent, it was something far older, far more dangerous than any of them had imagined. And yet, this alien girl was standing up to it. But the creature, now enraged beyond reason, wasn't backing down. It was getting more aggressive, more violent with each passing moment. Its movements were erratic, chaotic, as if it was being driven by an instinctual need to destroy. The air grew thick with tension as the creature howled and charged forward once more, claws swiping in wild arcs. This time, the girl didn't move. She remained still, her eyes locked onto the beast with a fierce determination. As the creature closed the gap between them, a low hum filled the room, coming from deep within her chest. It was a strange, resonating sound that seemed to reverberate through the very air, as though it was shifting the fabric of reality itself. Suddenly, with a force that sent shockwaves through the hall, a massive barrier of pure light erupted around her, encasing her like a protective shield. The creature slammed into it with an ear-splitting crack, its claws scraping helplessly against the energy field. The impact sent ripples through the shield, but it held firm, shimmering and glowing brighter with each second. Josh stood frozen, awestruck. What was this power? Who was this girl? The sight of her standing unflinching against the creature's attacks left him both terrified and captivated. He had seen his fair share of battles, but never anything like this. Never anything that felt otherworldly. The creature, growing desperate, turned its gaze toward the remaining members of the team, its fiery eyes narrowing with malice. It screeched, its voice a guttural growl that echoed through the hall like a war cry. Then, without warning, it released a burst of dark energy from its mouth, sending a wave of force hurtling toward Josh and his team. Josh didn't hesitate. He lunged for Karis, pulling her out of the path of the energy blast. The wave passed over them, slamming into the far wall with enough force to bring it crashing down. Dust and debris filled the air, but Josh barely registered it, his eyes fixed on the girl, who was still standing in the center of the room, her shield now flickering under the pressure of the creature's relentless attacks. What's her plan? Karis breathed, her voice frantic. She can't hold that thing off forever. Josh didn't know, but he knew one thing for sure, they couldn't just stand by and watch. This wasn't a situation they could simply escape from. This creature, whatever it was, had come through the rift for one reason, destruction. And if they didn't help her, they wouldn't just lose the alien girl, they'd lose everything. With no blaster and no obvious way to fight back, Josh's mind raced. There had to be something they could do. Something to turn the tide. Riker, we need to draw its attention, Josh said, his voice urgent. Buy her time. Karis nodded, a fierce glint in her eyes. She had never backed down from a challenge, no matter how impossible it seemed. Got it. Let's make some noise. She sprinted toward the creature, dodging a sweeping claw as she closed the distance between herself and the beast. She unleashed a flurry of gunfire, aiming for its exposed underbelly. The blasts bounced off its thick exoskeleton with little effect, but it was enough to get its attention. The creature howled, turning its massive form toward Karis with an animalistic snarl. Josh's heart raced as he glanced back at the girl. She was still holding her ground, but the shield was beginning to crack under the strain. The creature was relentless. It wouldn't stop until it had destroyed everything in its path. But Josh wouldn't let that happen. Not on his watch. The ground beneath them rumbled again as Karis sprinted away from the creature, narrowly avoiding a massive claw that swiped through the air, sending a spray of shattered stone and debris flying in all directions. Her heart pounded in her chest as she darted to the side, her breath quickening. It was working, she had its attention, but not for long. The creature's glowing eyes locked onto her, narrowing with fierce intent. The girl's barrier continued to flicker, the light around her pulse quickening with every hit from the monster's attacks. Josh knew that if they didn't act fast, they were all going to be caught in the crossfire. He couldn't just watch her hold off this creature alone, not when they had a chance to do something about it. Carter! Karis shouted, her voice laced with urgency. We need to bring this thing down, now. Josh's eyes scanned the room for anything they could use as a weapon or advantage. The walls were in ruins, chunks of rock and metal littered the floor. But nothing stood out as useful. The creature was too powerful, its energy blasts too intense. The barrier the girl had created was holding for now, but he knew it wouldn't last forever. Then, as if by sheer instinct, his eyes landed on the shimmering crystals embedded in the walls. The Ornari capital was renowned for its use of these energy crystals, known for their ability to absorb and redirect energy. Josh remembered the briefings, the long lists of technical specifications he'd skimmed through before arriving on this mission. If he could get close enough to one of those crystals, he could harness its power. It might just be enough to give the girl the extra energy she needed to take down the creature. His heart raced as he turned to Karis, who was already scanning the room for an opening. "There," he yelled, pointing toward one of the larger crystals embedded in the far wall. "We can use that crystal to amp up her shield. It's the only way we can turn the tide." Karis didn't hesitate. She took off at a full sprint, weaving through the debris and shattered remnants of the hall, her eyes fixed on the glowing crystal. The creature, still fixated on Karis, let out another earth-shattering roar, but Josh knew they didn't have time to wait. If they were going to survive this, they needed to act immediately. Josh dashed forward, drawing his knife and weaving through the wreckage. His heart was a chaotic rhythm in his chest, but his focus was razor-sharp. He had to get to the crystal before the creature realized what they were doing. But as he neared the crystal, the creature suddenly swung its enormous claw toward him. It was too close, there was no way he could dodge it in time. But then, from the corner of his eye, he saw the girl. Her violet eyes flared with a sudden, intense light. She raised her hand again, but this time, the energy she released wasn't aimed at the creature. It wasn't even aimed at herself. It was a bolt of raw energy, aimed directly at the crystal. The bolt hit with such force that the entire hall shook. A blinding flash of light filled the room, and the crystal hummed with an almost unbearable intensity. Josh had to shield his eyes from the glare, but when he opened them again, he saw the crystal glowing brighter than ever, a shimmering pulse of energy coursing through the air. The girl collapsed to her knees, her hands trembling as she held herself up. The shield around her flickered violently, but it held, just barely. The crystal had worked. Josh didn't hesitate. He made a running leap toward the crystal, slamming his palm against it. Almost instantly, he felt the surge of power course through him. The crystal, now supercharged with the girl's energy, began to hum louder, as if resonating with the very fabric of the room. "Now!" Josh shouted. Karis, barely avoiding another swipe from the creature's claws, slid to a stop next to him. She yanked a nearby charging device from her utility belt and attached it to the crystal. The device immediately began to siphon the energy, redirecting it toward the girl's shield. The result was immediate. The girl's shield flared with renewed intensity, pushing back against the creature's relentless barrage. The creature staggered, its glowing eyes flickering as if it had been stunned by the sudden surge of power. The hum of the energy field resonated through the room, amplifying until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate in unison with the force. The creature snarled in fury and charged again, its massive form barreling toward them. But this time, the girl wasn't alone. Her energy shield had grown far more powerful, reinforced by the crystal's massive charge. The creature slammed into the barrier, but instead of a crack, it was met with a burst of light that sent it stumbling back, its claws scraping helplessly against the indestructible force. Josh grinned, despite the chaos. "That's it, keep it up. We've got it on the ropes." But as the creature reeled, something shifted in the air. The hum of the shield started to fluctuate, a deep, pulsing thrum like the sound of a heartbeat. The girl was barely holding on, her breath shallow as she struggled to maintain the energy field. Sweat glistened on her forehead, and Josh could see the strain in her eyes. "It's too much for her," Karis said urgently, her voice full of concern. "She can't keep this up much longer." Josh turned to the girl, his heart tightening. They needed a way to break this stalemate. The creature was stronger than they had thought. But the girl was just as determined. He could see the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had kept her standing against this monster even when it seemed impossible. Suddenly, an idea sparked in Josh's mind. He didn't know if it would work, but he had to try. He turned to Karis. "Get ready. We're going to overload the crystal." Karis's eyes widened. "Are you crazy? That could blow us all to pieces." "I know," Josh replied grimly, "but it's our only chance." The creature, sensing the growing instability in the shield, roared again, its claws raised high, ready to strike. Josh turned back to the girl, who was barely holding on to consciousness. There was no time to waste. Without further hesitation, he ran toward the girl, reaching for the crystal's power conduit. He twisted the power regulator, causing the energy flow to spike. The crystal's hum grew louder, higher-pitched, vibrating with power. The girl's shield flared one last time, but it was now pulsating, growing unstable. "Do it now!" Josh shouted. Karis slammed her hand down on a nearby control panel, activating the full charge. The crystal's energy skyrocketed, sending a surge of raw power directly into the shield. And then, with a cataclysmic roar, the creature charged again. Time seemed to stretch out as the creature, empowered by its fury and unrelenting desire to destroy, bore down on the girl. The energy shield around her flickered one last time, a final pulse of light as the last of the crystal's power was directed into its protection. The air itself seemed to hum with the imminent detonation, the buildup of energy reaching its peak. Josh's heart thundered in his chest as he watched the creature charge with unstoppable force. Every muscle in his body tensed. He was poised at the edge of the precipice, and there was no going back now. "Get down," he shouted to Karis, his voice filled with urgency. But it was too late for them to run. The barrier was about to collapse. The explosion of energy that would follow would be enough to destroy everything within a 100-meter radius. The girl's violet eyes, flickering with pain but unwavering determination, locked onto Josh for one brief, intense moment. Her gaze seemed to communicate something he couldn't quite grasp, a silent plea or perhaps an unspoken recognition. She wasn't going to make it. And then, with a final, terrifying cry, the creature launched itself at her, claws extended. It was a blur of motion, its jagged limbs closing in on the girl. The air around her shimmered as if the space itself was rebelling against the immense pressure building between them. But instead of shattering under the creature's attack, the girl's shield erupted outward in a massive pulse of pure energy. The wave of force shot out in all directions, catching the creature off guard. The blast hit the beast square in the chest, sending it reeling backward. For a moment, it hovered in midair, suspended by the sheer power of the burst, its body crackling with arcs of energy. Then, with a thunderous impact, it crashed to the floor, skidding across the room, leaving a trail of molten rock in its wake. Josh's breath caught in his throat. For a brief, hopeful moment, the creature didn't move. But only for a moment. The creature slowly began to rise, the darkness in its eyes burning more intensely than before. It was not going down easily. Its body, now glowing with a strange dark energy, seemed to grow stronger with every second. It was like an ancient force, a malevolent spirit, one that could not be defeated through simple weapons or even through sheer strength. It fed on destruction. "No," Josh whispered, feeling the weight of his realization crush him. "This isn't enough." Karis, still on her feet and close to the crystal, cursed under her breath. "We need to finish this, Josh. It's not going to stop until it's wiped us out." But Josh was already moving. His mind raced, trying to piece together what they had left. He glanced down at the girl, who was still standing, her energy nearly spent, barely holding herself upright. "Karis," Josh barked, "the crystal. We need to stabilize it one more time." "Are you out of your mind?" Karis snapped. "That's going to blow us all to hell." Josh didn't hesitate. He grabbed the crystal's regulator, knowing the danger they were facing. "It's the only chance we've got." As he reactivated the crystal's power feed, the hum of the crystal resonated through the room, louder than ever. Its energy surged again, this time working in tandem with the girl's efforts. She lifted her hand one last time, and for the first time since the battle had begun, there was a certainty in her eyes. She wasn't just reacting anymore. She was taking control. "Do it now," she whispered. Josh slammed his hand onto the final control switch, activating a synchronized pulse between the crystal's massive stored energy and the girl's shield. A moment later, the room exploded with light, more intense than before, more violent, as the girl's energy collided with the crystal's full charge. The shockwave blasted outward in every direction, rattling the walls, shaking the very foundations of the hall. The energy surged through the air like a thunderstorm, sending ripples through the ground and up into the sky. The creature, its body screaming with fury, was caught at the center of the explosion. For a split second, Josh could see it, its monstrous form disintegrating in the overwhelming glow of energy, fading into nothingness. And then, silence. The explosion's aftershock reverberated for several long moments, but the oppressive air of danger had lifted. The ground had stopped shaking, the air was still, and the low hum of the crystal was all that remained, slowly fading back to silence. Josh, blinking away the sudden brightness, finally dared to open his eyes. He looked toward the girl. She was standing, her body swaying slightly, her breathing labored but still intact. The shield had disappeared, and with it, the glowing barrier around her had dissolved. She was exhausted, her body trembling with the exertion of the immense energy she'd unleashed. He could feel his pulse slow, the tension in his body gradually ebbing away. They had done it. Against all odds, they had survived. But as the dust settled and the last echoes of the explosion faded, Josh couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The creature had been powerful, unnatural. There was no way it had come from just anywhere, or by accident. It was a harbinger, a precursor to something far more devastating. The rift that had opened, the strange anomalies surrounding them, none of it made sense. What was that thing? Karis asked breathlessly, stepping up beside him, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. "I don't know," Josh answered, still staring at the wreckage where the creature had been. "But I don't think that's the last we'll see of it." Karis nodded slowly, her gaze flickering to the girl. "And her? What now?" The girl, still standing but clearly struggling to stay conscious, gave Josh a faint smile. Despite her obvious exhaustion, there was something powerful about her, something Josh couldn't ignore. She had saved them, had fought with every ounce of her strength, and had never faltered. "I don't know," Josh said again, but this time with more certainty in his voice. "But whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The girl's smile widened, and she nodded. For the first time, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I am not alone," she said, her eyes meeting Josh's. "Not anymore." And as the weight of her words settled over them, Josh realized that this was only the beginning. The battle they had just fought had been one small piece of something much larger, something that spanned across the stars, and he could feel it in his bones. The universe had just shifted. And they were right in the middle of it. The journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning.